So today we're going to be hearing from Jens Wieting, and Jens is calling in from Portland. Just checking my list. It looks like he is on here now. And I see your video here now. Before we get started, I just want to remind people, or for those who haven't been on a webinar with us before, there's a chat box. You can find it. For most of you, it'll be at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little button you can click that says chat, and then it'll pop up. For me, it pops up on the bottom right-hand side, and you can chat, sending messages to everyone, or sending messages to specific people. And it looks like Jens has started sharing his screen, and it is working, Jens. Excellent. So I'm just gonna give a little bit of an introduction before Jens starts off on his presentation. Again, for those who are just joining, my name is Galen Armstrong. I'm the lead organizer with Sierra Club BC, and I'm calling in from Duncan, BC, where I live. I'm working from home today, and Duncan is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan Nation. I've lived here for just a few months, moved here in February from Salt Spring Island, and I also work a couple days a week in Sierra Club BC's Victoria office. So a few months ago, before the summer, we offered a series of webinars. It was the forest webinar series. There was a lot of participation, and we got a lot of really excellent feedback. So this is a one-off. This is a special presentation offered in honor of the climate strike that's happening right now. So, as probably most or all of you know, there's a youth-led, student-led climate strike happening this week. In particular, there was a huge strike this past Friday, and there will be another really big one this coming Friday. If you weren't able to be part of last Friday's, I hope that you can be part of this upcoming Friday's strike. So the youth are leading, and they're asking asking adults to come and be there and support. And probably most of you have seen the really powerful images of huge crowds, millions of people across the world who went out in support and calling for climate action. So at Sierra Club BC, we're working to fight climate change in many different ways, and I think, you know, some of the most important work that we do is on protecting the last remaining forests, and including the last remaining old growth forests. So Jens is going to talk today about why forests are so important in the fight for climate change, and why they're such an important tool for stopping climate change. Those of you who were on our previous webinars will know Jens. Those of you, others may know him as well. Jens Wieting has been doing work on the forest issues for many years. He did a lot of incredible work on the Great Bear Rainforest Agreements. He has been one of the leading voices in connecting forests to climate change in BC and in the global context. And so I'm really excited to hear what Jens has to say. So Jens, I'm going to turn it over to you and find your unmute button here. There you go. Go for it, Jens.
Thanks, Galen, and hi, everyone. It's awesome that we have quite a few online on a Monday at noon, and of course it's an important week, and I hope you're all as inspired as I am by what is happening around the world. It's a little weird for me to do this in Portland. I'm on my way to a conference in California and decided to travel low carbon by bus and a small rental car. But today we are going to talk about forests and climate, and for a number of reasons. You all know how important forests are in the fight against climate change, but it is really astounding that to this day we are failing in BC to live up to our global responsibility, because looking at BC's forests, we are in a really unique situation to take action and to inspire the world. And there's so much information out there that shows that we are close to tipping points. There's so much information out there that shows that we have a unique responsibility, that we could talk for hours about this. I'm hoping to focus on a few key messages and some key findings that you can use in your conversations, and hopefully you will find this useful. And we have to do this work now because we're running out of time. So without further ado, I will jump right in. This is an example why climate change and forests are so intertwined, and there are so many similarities in terms of critical moments in time. This is simply an example of tipping points. You all heard about tipping points. Just look at the Amazon rainforest there, or look at the Arctic and the West Antarctic and East Antarctic ice sheets. So there are a number of places on the planet that will tip into a different state, and things will become very serious if this happens, if we don't bring down our emissions. And what is similar to the to forests as a system is that they also have tipping points. So we have governments that are ignoring dangerous limits and tipping points in the context of climate change as we increase emissions in the atmosphere and nearing 1.5 or 2 degrees of global warming. And in the case of our forests, it's often about how much is left, how much is protected. And if we are not protecting enough forests, they cannot exist because they have to sustain themselves. I will give a few examples of this, but we are seeing similar dangerous limits, and we are seeing similar levels of ignorance when it comes to governments stuck in business as usual, and we have to change that. So here are a few reminders why we cannot save a stable climate without intact forests, and we cannot save intact forests without a stable climate. They are already helping us. They are slowing down human-caused climate change by absorbing a very big chunk of our pollution. They can also become part of the problem if we destroy them, or if they get so weakened by climate impacts like droughts that they go up in flames and they can contribute huge amounts of additional carbon. Just a reminder here that the estimate of the total storage of carbon in forests is more than 300 gigatons of carbon, or 300 billion tons of carbon, and that's several decades worth of human-caused emissions. So the good news is that right now many forests remain stable. We see very alarming signs, but here's also a reminder, there are still a lot of forests out there, and many of them remain healthy, and we really have to keep it this way, because we are definitely seeing some alarming trends and some warning signs. So in short, any global plan to stabilize the climate will require protecting and restoring forests. This is simply a quick visual where part of our emissions are disappearing. So about half of our pollution ends up in the atmosphere, about a quarter is absorbed by ecosystems on land, and another quarter by oceans, which, as some of you know, causes ocean acidification, and that's a topic for another webinar. And to get a sense just how much is moving through all vegetation on land, here's a quote from Tim Flannery. So he mentioned in his book Now or Never that each year the total amount of carbon dioxide captured by all plants on the planet is about 8% of all the carbon in the atmosphere. So at that rate, it would take only 12 years to draw all the carbon out of the atmosphere. Of course, this doesn't happen because plants are breathing in and are breathing out. And when plants decompose, which is also happening naturally, they also release carbon. So this is just an example to give you an idea just how much carbon moves through vegetation. And of course, the key point is how much do we have? Can we have a lot of forests, or will we continue to reduce the amount of forests and other ecosystems? And that will accordingly reduce the ability of vegetation to store carbon. And while a lot of the carbon gets absorbed, we also have significant emissions from forests, from land use. This is an example for how long this is already happening. So we are going back here to the 19th century. We can see that 200 years ago, we didn't have much emissions from fossil fuels at all. It was all coming from land use. It was already significant. And then slowly, moving into the age of industrialization, we increased emissions from fossil fuels, and now they are way higher than those forest emissions. But it's still absolutely critical to address both. And you all know how quickly we have to do this. So we're not going to talk about fossil fuels today, but if we cannot stop our emissions from fossil fuels, starting by stopping all new projects like pipelines and LNG terminals, we cannot win this. So we have to do both. And this is a graph from the IPCC report showing that we have to reduce emissions by about half in 10 years or 12 years, and then we have to achieve net zero mid-century. And if we want to have a higher likelihood of success of avoiding dangerous levels of warming, we have to do it earlier. We should do it by 2040, not 2050. So, of course, I'm going to talk about the Amazon for a moment because it is very concerning. But it's also important to have a moment and reality check here, because some of the important coverage can leave you hopeless and feel like, okay, it's too late. So like the burning of the Amazon, good article, but here's a reminder that we are doing this too. This is an image from BC, but more importantly, this is what the Amazon rainforest within Brazil looks like. So we have about 80% remaining tropical rainforest in Brazil, and we have lost about 20%. So this is deforestation. This is a real long-term loss of forest. We are seeing a lot of land cleared permanently for, oh, I can see somebody writing on my screen. That's funny.
Wasn't me. Hello.
I didn't even know that that's possible, but it's fun. So we are losing a lot of forest in this area, and that's the deforestation. And then I want to start right away connecting the dots here. Vancouver Island is probably one of the most extreme examples you can find for degradation. So we are converting intact ancient forest into young forest, into plantation forest, permanent loss of ecological values and of carbon stored in trees, because we are cutting them down again at a young age. So they're not allowed to grow old again. And here the numbers are reversed. We're looking at the productive old growth big tree ecosystems. We have only about 20% left. So obviously this poses the question, how can we expect that Brazil will protect 80% of the Amazon rainforest if we cannot stop logging the last 20% of the big trees on Vancouver Island? There's a lot of talk globally about tree planting. And this is another Guardian Weekly cover, and it's a good reminder how important trees are. Really good article too. You probably saw some of these because they made global headlines this summer. So a team of scientists, some of them sitting in Switzerland, found that if we could plant huge amounts of land with young trees, that over time this would address about 2/3 of the pollution in the atmosphere. And of course, this sounds a little bit too good to be true. And here's why. So planting trees sounds great, but what will happen if we plant trees and they begin to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere? The oceans will actually lose some of the carbon dioxide, because when we bring down the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by removing some of it through trees or other means, the oceans who are in balance with the atmosphere will release some of the carbon dioxide again. So we will only see about half of the emission reductions from trees reflected in the actual result in the atmosphere. And if you want to read more about this, because I know this is complex, find this article. It's called "Can Planting Trees Save Our Climate?" It's written by Stefan Rahmsdorf, and I will share my slides with you later, and you can Google this article. So the oceans will buffer the effect. It will take a long time to plant trees, 50 to 100 years until they really absorb a lot of carbon. Some forests might not survive because of climate change, but it's still important because it can help to deliver the most difficult final 10 to 15% reduction, getting to zero emissions. So technically, we can reduce all our emissions from burning fossil fuels by 80 to 90% with the technologies that exist today. And then we will still need more trees to reduce emissions, the remaining emissions, and offset some of those. And this is an example from an IPCC report that shows how important it is to not only plant trees, but protect what we already have. So if you look at those examples, which I highlighted with a red circle, you see that maintaining what we already have, maintaining the forest area, maintaining the carbon density, maintaining the carbon already stored in trees has an immediate impact. It brings down emissions today, because if we destroy forests today, they release a lot of carbon in the short term. And that's the most important thing we need in the next few years, because we need immediate results. And planting trees has a lot of uncertainty and will take a lot of time to see the results. And now we are looking at the whole planet here. So we had about half of the planet's land covered with forests, and today we have, roughly speaking, about 30% covered by forests, and obviously some of them are damaged. And very concerningly, we have lost about 120 billion tons of carbon as a result of thousands of years of destroying forests. We now have enormous amounts of information about how many trees have existed, how many remain. Today we have, looking at trees, this study claims we have about 3 trillion trees remaining. And there's no other nation that has more trees per person than Canada. About 9,000 trees for every human in Canada. The global average is just 400. And again, here it's degradation. This is an important study that came out in 2013, looked at 12 years of forest loss and degradation. And what they found at the time is that during this 12-year period, Canada was the leader in degradation. So of a total of 100 million hectares degraded permanently or for a period really damaged as a result of fire or logging, we contributed more than any other nation, 8% of this huge area, 100 million hectares. So technically still forest, but severely damaged, either very young trees or recovering from fire. And we have not only huge lands of covered with forest, but we also have some of the most remarkable ecosystems. Temperate rainforests were always incredibly rare, never covered more than about half a percentage point. And they have record high carbon storage because the trees grow so old. They get hundreds or 1,000 years old, so they accumulate carbon over time. And we also have the tallest trees on the planet. So there are tiny spots in other parts of the world where you can find trees that grow 70, 80 or more meters tall, but nowhere in numbers like along the Pacific Northwest. And now with climate change, we see a lot of shifting ecosystems in BC. This is a map from our The Future is Here report. It shows that many ecosystems, for example, grasslands will expand. Some forest ecosystems will disappear. You can see this, for example, in the Northeast, where we have less, we will have less boreal forests, and there will be more grasslands at the end of the century. The only part of the province where ecosystems could stay relatively stable if we fight climate change and stop our emissions is along the coast. So these would be the grayish areas that are relatively stable. And this means this is our best bet to have forests that are not completely disrupted this century. There will be changes. We already see this with Western red cedar, for example, but we can still protect and maintain some resilience if we keep the warming levels from getting much worse. This is an important qualifier. This is our best bet. That's why it's so important to increase protection of those forests that are more resilient, that have very old trees. And as you all know, we already see a lot of disruption in other parts of the province. So primarily in the interior, this is one of the forest fire maps from summer 2018. This is one of the key recommendations from a report by Rachel Holt, that we have to make this distinction and keep those forests that are relatively resilient, coastal rainforest, for example, manage them for resilience. This means increasing protection and improve forest management. And then in other parts, we have transition, we have to help nature and forests. In some cases, this means that we will see different tree species. And then there are others where they're falling in between the spectrum, and we have to manage for resistance, which also means increasing protection and some assistance in shifting to the new state. You can look this up and find the report if you like to read studies like this. I'm actually going to skip this because it has too many numbers. This is another nice one, a study from 2008, the first one that looked at hundreds of examples globally and showed that old growth forests continue to sequester carbon. So the forest industry is sharing this narrative that, oh, old forests are essentially dying forests and we should remove them, make wood products and plant young trees. But this study showed that using hundreds of examples that almost all old growth forests continue to sequester even more carbon. So it's like a big amount of money in your bank account with a top up every year. And one reason is that there are a lot of old trees, but they're not all at the end of their age. And you know this when you walk through an old growth forest, there are trees of different ages, and some of them are relatively old, but still very healthy and continue to sequester more carbon. The average is about 2 tons of carbon per hectare in a temperate rainforest. You know, this is the additional annual sequestration on top of the hundreds of tons of carbon already stored from the past. This is one example. It's described in the book about the giant trees along the Pacific. This the Queets spruce, particularly healthy old tree on the Olympic Peninsula. And the author found information that this tree is so healthy that it sequesters the same amount of carbon like a quarter acre of second growth forest. So this would mean about 0.1 hectare, I guess, a quarter acre. It's a big chunk of land with second growth forest that you have to plant before you get the same amount of carbon sequestration that this single old tree can still deliver. And a reminder about what's happening on the East Coast. We've lost a lot of the old growth on Vancouver Island. We have more in the Great Bear Rainforest. Here's a photo reminding us about the beauty of some of the remaining intact forests along the north and central coast, where we have 85% of the forest set aside with some challenges. There's more work needed to ensure that all these forests protected on paper will truly be set aside. And then this shocking reminder of what happened on the south coast and on Vancouver Island, original and remaining. Again, combined, we have about 20% old growth left, but even less than 10% of the biggest trees. And comparing the speed, how quickly we are losing the remaining old growth, it's 3 times faster than the average tropical rainforest deforestation rate in tropical countries. So those tropical countries have seen a loss about 10% between 1990 and 2015 overall. On Vancouver Island, we lost 30% of what remained in 1990 in just 25 years. And looking at the Great Bear Rainforest example, the NDP made this fantastic promise during the election campaign. In partnership with First Nations and communities, we will modernize land use planning to effectively and sustainably manage BC's ecosystems, including old growth. And we will take an evidence-based scientific approach and use the ecosystem-based management of the Great Bear Rainforest as a model. That was very powerful because the most important thing that we learned from the science in the Great Bear Rainforest is that there are dangerous limits. When you have very little left, you have to stop logging it. You have to do this for all the different types of old growth, the big tree ecosystems, just importantly as the smaller tree ecosystems. So exactly what we need for Vancouver Island, where most of the forest set aside is in the mountains, we need higher protection everywhere, and it has not happened yet. So I have to talk about Clayoquot Sound for a moment. Some of you have heard about this. The Ahousaht First Nation is really giving us hope. They show fantastic leadership, and they have a proposal and a land use vision where they want to set aside 80% of the remaining intact forest in their territory, which covers most of Clayoquot Sound. And we're talking about 8 to 10% of Vancouver Island here. This is a big portion of Vancouver Island. And recently we were hopeful because the federal government included funding to support this initiative as part of their plans to help to protect 17% of all land in Canada. And we have not seen enough support for this initiative from the BC government. This is really an additional example where it's difficult to find out why the BC government has not shown more leadership. This is a no-brainer. We have a very inspiring proposal, and the Ahousaht and other nations are very interested in protecting more of their land. They need support from both federal and provincial government. The federal government is now in the boat, and we are still waiting for a strong signal. so far we have only heard timid response from the BC government. We are really hoping to hear more from the BC government and funding commitments to help this nation and other nations that want to protect. Here's an example of all the scientists' support for protecting the rare forest in BC, a letter from 2018 reminding everybody about how globally rare these forests are. And the solution for Vancouver Island and for other parts of the province where we still have old growth forests now in dramatically reduced numbers is relatively straightforward. We need new protected areas, very likely indigenous protected areas, because it's 2019 and this work must happen led by the nations. Here are some examples of areas you have heard that need protection, and First Nations need support to be able to protect them, from the Walbran on the southern portion of Vancouver Island to East Creek, close to the Brooks Peninsula on the northern island. We often refer to these remaining intact areas as hotspots. And then we need protection for endangered ecosystems. In this map from 2016, we showed those ecosystems, those remaining old growth ecosystems that have now less than 30 or even less than 10% of their original old growth left. They're shown in red and orange here. These puzzle pieces are so-called landscape units. And using simple ways like this, the government can quickly identify the most endangered ecosystems and take action immediately. Maybe develop a transition strategy that allows companies to adjust to this reality. The information exists, but we are just not seeing it in detail from the BC government. We are still waiting for the proposals to do these things. Protect hotspots and protect the most endangered ecosystems. Many of you have joined our call for action and used rainforestisland.ca for calling for protection, calling for supporting the nations and their vision, and for supporting the forestry sector to adjust to this reality and improve forest management so that we can have more jobs per cubic meter. So we have to continue to do this. Some of you joined us in the fall of 2018, where we shared 185,000 messages from around the world together with the tourism sector. We had 2 days of action in February and June, visiting M&A offices. And we also submitted input together with hundreds of you for changes to the forestry regulation. So one of the few moments of hope was when we learned from Minister Donaldson that he wants to hear from our organizations on old growth because they were making some changes in the Forest and Range Practices Act this year, and now they're looking at more changes in the spring of 2020, and this is very important. So we had a website up, 28 environmental groups submitted input specifically on old growth protection. The Environmental Law Center developed a report calling for 30% minimum protection for all types of old growth. So this all happened by July 15. That was the request. Submit your input by July 15. We all did this. Hopes are and expectations are high that they will include changes on old growth. But 2 days later, on July 17, they had a media release about protecting 54 trees with a buffer and announcing a new process. So a two-person panel will hear from British Columbians about old growth in the fall, and they will have recommendations in the spring. And that's a concern because we just submitted our input. And I think it's very important for all of us to remind the BC government every opportunity we have that we need big, bold change in FERPA in 2020. If they want to hear more about old growth, to do more later, that's also fine, but we need initial steps early 2020. So this is a very important moment. There will be a number of ways how you can continue to support this fight for increasing old growth protection. This is important information. I was tempted to share a 3-minute clip, but we will wait and have a Q&A in a moment. But this is a fantastic clip. You can find the link in my slides. Check it out with Greta and with George Monbiot about protecting, restoring, and funding these efforts to help in the fight against climate change. And also just a reminder about other information out there. The BC government released information about how BC's carbon pollution is trending, and some of you might have seen it. It's just happened days ago, something was sun coverage that BC's emissions continue to go up. They are still about 60 million tons, but it also showed very hidden in the Excel sheet that BC's total forest emissions are now more than 200 million tons. And the BC government put out a media release talking about the 60 million tons of emissions, but they didn't mention the 200 million tons of forest emissions because they are not counted as part of our official emissions. They still had the opportunity to include this information in their media release, which they didn't. So we have to make sure in all our conversations to remind even people in government that this is happening. We had a short report out in January, hidden, ignored, and growing about these emissions. This graph is from that report. It was a projection that we would have more than 200 million tons of emissions from destructive logging, from slash burning, from fires, now primarily from fires. And that's exactly the information that is now contained at the bottom of the Excel sheet of the BC government, but they didn't include it in their media release. So they have to do a better job reducing emissions and sharing this information. Last slide, because you can find more information in this article just out in the National Observer end of the week, debunking old growth forest claims in British Columbia. Unfortunately, this was necessary because we see a lot of misleading information coming from the BC government. You can check out this article, and you will also find some of the information I just explained about how concerning it is that just after we submitted our input on forestry regulation, we have now a new process. We might have to participate in it. We already have the information, we can share it again, but we really need initial bold steps for old growth in the spring of 2020. And now we are ready for questions. I hope I didn't take too much time. I hope it wasn't boring. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jens. And it wasn't boring at all. This is fascinating. And I always learn new things when I'm hearing from you. I don't see any questions yet. So I'm going to encourage people to go to the chat box and type in a question. There is one comment though that I will bring forward to you, Jens, and it's from S. Rose, and it says, "Language matters. We didn't passively lose this forest cover, we actively destroyed it." You want to speak to that?
Yes, I agree. We actively destroyed it, and language matters, and sometimes we end up using similar language like the language we often read in the newspaper. And it's funny because Torrance just talked about this on Twitter. There are also super sad headlines about how 3 billion birds disappeared in the previous decades. I think it's happened in North America, and again we are using this language that forests are disappearing or birds are disappearing, but we have destroyed the habitat of 3 billion birds, and we are destroying the old growth forest, and it's very maddening. And we have to use the right language. I agree. Thanks for the comment.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just jump in and remind people that, of course, this is the week of the climate strike, and especially this Friday, wherever you are, I encourage you to leave, drop what you're doing and go and join the youth. You can find searching for Global Climate Strike or going to sierraclub.bc.ca or our Facebook page. You can find your local events. So we've got a couple of questions coming in here now, and we'll go to this, I guess, in order here. From Kara. Kara asks, what is a really good question to ask of our federal candidates? We are, of course, in the midst of a federal election. When we go to the all candidates debates. At this election time, any more advice about federal roles in our forestry would be timely. Really good question, Kara. Thanks.
So when it comes to forest management and protected areas in BC, the federal government has somewhat limited influence, but there are still many things that we should bring up. So number one, the provinces cannot lead in terms of protecting land and ocean without strong federal leadership. And right now, the federal government looks better compared to provincial governments because they have set aside a little over $1 billion of funding to contribute to the goal to protect 17% of the land, and I think 10% of the oceans along the Canadian coast. But scientists and many environmental groups are already talking about how we need the next step. And usually we hear scientists referring to nature needs half. This is based on science that shows that we have to protect about 50% of the land for most plants and animals. And of course, in light of climate change and the natural carbon sinks, this is even more important. And we also have to protect more oceans. And maybe the most important message that we have to take to them is that there's no other country on the planet that could do more than Canada. I mean, as some of you know, I'm from Germany, and Canada is 30 times larger than Germany, but has only about 35 million people that live in this part of the world. So we are seeing this in terms of number of people living in this vast country. We are seeing this in the number of trees for every person in Canada. We are blessed that we live in this part of the world, and we have to do way more. If a small country like Costa Rica can protect about 25% of their land, Canada should not struggle to meet the 17% target, and we should absolutely contribute more than a smaller nation like Costa Rica. So I don't see a reason why we cannot help to move quickly to 30 and then to 50% protection. We have incredible ecological values. We also have incredible fossil fuel reserves, incredibly dangerous fossil fuel reserves, and we could combine this action by setting aside ecological values and unburnable carbon. So the federal government has lots of opportunities to lead, beginning with stopping the pipelines, increasing protection on land, in the oceans, go beyond the minimum targets that are discussed internationally, and combine protection with unburnable carbon, setting aside fossil fuel reserves. That would be true leadership.
Great, thanks, Jens. And yeah, I really encourage everyone to go to those all candidates meetings wherever you are in your communities and ask about climate and forests. So there's a question here. We have a couple more questions. One is from Emma. Emma asks, of the old growth forests that are logged, what are they logged for? Is it industrial wood use or paper? So what is this wood being used for?
So it's a combination. We have some companies, and at least until recently, Teal Jones was an example that used the old growth logs in their BC sawmills, and at least some jobs were related to that. And we have shocking numbers of old growth logs moving out together with second growth in terms of raw log exports. So if you go and find the CCPA, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternative, and Ben Parfitt's research on raw log exports, very easy to find on their website. You can find the specific numbers, but the short answer is that we have millions of cubic meters leaving the country, leaving the province as old growth logs. So that's the biggest, that's the most extreme example that you can find, destroying nature for absolutely limited economic benefit. And then these logs are processed in other parts of the world. And then we always have, sadly, some of the wood, because the companies are interested in the very big trees, but there's also a lot of, there are also many logs that are not such great quality. So you also have examples where old growth logs are used for pulp and paper. So all these things continue to happen, and it is very concerning because there are very few uses where we want to support long-term access to old growth timber for unique indigenous cultural purposes like canoes or totem poles. But if we want to ensure that this is possible for the next 7 generations, then we really have to stop destroying old growth for short-term profit and very small benefit.
Great, thank you, Jens. There are a couple of more questions in the queue here. Dave says, I have a group of students attending, assuming attending the climate strike. Do you have any, or maybe it's attending this webinar now actually, do you have any message for a grade 11 students in attendance? For instance, is there a field of study you suggest in order to make a difference for BC and for the planet? And Dave, I'd be curious, do you mean attending right now or attending this Friday? But go ahead, Jens.
So in terms of fields of study, why don't I share in 1 minute my background? Like I was always very passionate about nature. I grew up in Germany, and there was definitely a time when I was interested in becoming a forester. But then I met students as a teenager. I met students from a nearby university that studied land use planning, which is a big thing in Germany because it is the key decision-making process where governments are supposed to use all kinds of information, looking at ecosystems, ecological values, clean water, clean air, habitat, and many other values, together with economic considerations, whether it's about how to solve a traffic problem or where to put industry, and undertake careful planning, considering all the information. So there are definitely quite a few fields like geography. There are different streams of geography, but it's often related to planning. So I found that very interesting because it combines so many different aspects, looking at ecosystems and the economy and cultural values and so on. But I don't have specific recommendations for BC universities, so maybe others can share more for.
Jens, I just unmuted Dave and the students there. Dave, is there any follow-up questions from you or the students?
No, we're all attending from different locations, so they're not sitting in the room with me here. They're from their own homes.
Gotcha.
But no, it's a very interesting webinar. Very much appreciated. So much to be done, and so many other places have all forested all of their lumber, and what we can do to protect what we have would be great. When we think about what's going on in the Amazon, etc., and we do live in a wonderful place, as already mentioned, and the forest is such a big part of that. And like the Japanese use forest bathing as therapy, and you know we have so much forest in place just to be that it's just a wonderful thing to think about our forest being something that's here forever.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Dave. And hello to all the students at the Students Without Borders Academy in Vernon, BC. There's another question here, and it's, what is a good way the youth can stay active and make a difference in this issue? And how can we raise awareness and pressure on our government? And I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. That was a message or a question from Quinn. Quinn, did I get the question right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jens.
Well, I'll make it really quick, and then Galen, you should also comment on this. We already talked a bit about how you can help us with online signing and sharing rainforestisland.ca. That's where you find like the key calls for action. And then way more ambitious, needs a little bit of preparation we can help with, is to request meetings with your M&A, for example. Another really great thing to use is always a letter to the editor. So using all opportunities in looking at local and provincial newspapers, often a very short letter has the best chance of getting published. And there are often opportunities to comment on something. Take the example of where the Vancouver Sun and the province talked about how BC's emissions are still going up a little bit. They didn't talk much about the forest emissions. So there's so many opportunities to comment on things and remind people that we must never forget forests when we talk about climate action. But I think Galen has some more suggestions.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and you asked a really good question, Quinn, because it is about putting pressure on these governments. They have the power. I mean, in British Columbia, it's really the provincial government that has a lot of the power to make this change, and they're simply not using it, or using it in the wrong way. They're really dragging their feet, as Jens has described. So what we're doing at Sierra Club BC is we have volunteers around the province who are sending letters to the Forest Minister, Doug Donaldson, by way of an electronic letter. So what we do is we go out to events, we go out and canvass on the street, we ask people to sign this letter that then becomes an electronic letter. We have sent about 18,000 of these letters from British Columbians, and so we're nearing 20,000 now. When we hit 20,000, we'll do another media event, some kind of splashy event where we can announce that, as we did with 10,000. But what we really need is more people on the streets, being creative, holding events, bringing, talking about forest and climate. It's not a simple issue, as Jens showed us. It is. There's a lot of complexity to it, but the message is very simple. Like it's absolutely simple that we have, very little of our old growth left in BC, and it absolutely needs to be protected. And so we need to communicate that simply to the people in our community and get them on board so we can increase the amount of pressure on our government. I would encourage everyone here to get in touch with me. My email is galen@sierraclub.bc.ca, and I'll put that in the chat box. You can also go to the Sierra Club website and sign up to be a volunteer. We need more people. We work closely with other groups such as Wilderness Committee and Ancient Forest Alliance. We've done lots of events with them, and we'll continue to do that. we also, Jens is representing us in these government meetings, and almost always he'll get back after these meetings and say, we need more pressure, we need more people involved in raising their voices so the government really gets the message, and that's what we're doing. There's a question here, so thanks again, Quinn, for that. There's one more question, I think that's about what we have time for, and is there a Sierra Club chapter in the Okanagan? So Dave, this is a question from Dave. There's not a chapter. We do have volunteers in the Okanagan that I could absolutely connect you with, and I'd love to do that. So please do get in touch with me, and we can follow up and talk more about that. I'm putting my email in the chat box right now. So Jens, are there any final comments that you'd like to make and wrap it up?
I don't have a final comment, but first of all, I want to thank you for joining us, and thanks for all you do. I know you have busy lives, and I know that you are involved in many fights, so thanks for that. And Gail, do you want to show this really cool 3-minute clip? I find it really upbeat for those of you who want to be on for the last 3 minutes, and that could be the end.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's end off with that video, and I just want to remind everyone once again, this Friday is going to be another huge worldwide climate strike, and you can go to globalclimatestrike.net to find your local student-led protest or strike. Now, Jens, I hope that you're going to be able to share this with sound. So why don't you go ahead and give it a try? As you do that, I'll just let people know. Oh, looks like
I paused it.
Okay, great. Yeah, one more thing from me. I'll ask people. We offer these sessions for free. I really encourage people to become a member of Sierra Club BC. It's only $15. And it helps us continue to fight these fights and to educate people through these webinars. Also, we will be doing another webinar for a series. And if there are people that you would like to hear from in that series, please get in touch with me and let me know. And that's my final word. Thanks everybody for being on the webinar, and we'll leave you off with this video. Thanks, Jens.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Galen. And here's the video.
It's not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about, but what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions can make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy. Right now, when we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
Up to 200 species are going extinct every single day.
Much of the Arctic ice is gone. Most of our wild animals have gone. Much of our soil has gone.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, We must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
This can happen everywhere. Many people have already begun using natural climate solutions. We need to do it on a massive scale.
You can be part of this.
Vote for people who defend nature.
Share this video. Talk about this.
All around the world, there are amazing movements fighting for nature. Join them.
Everything counts. What you do counts.
Beautiful video. Thank you, Jens.
Thanks, everyone.